This is the Education Exchange with Paul Peterson. I am the senior editor at Education Next. Thank you for joining us. As trust in government has taken a nosedive, educators and political figures have begun to assess the quality of American civic education. Is it possible that our colleges and our high schools are teaching students to look for everything wrong in American government and society and at nothing that's right? Are the strengths of the American political tradition, as articulated in the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago this year, are they being ignored? Are our leading educators encouraging an emphasis on the negative instead? Well, that's the question Richard Kahlenberg asks in a new report released by the Progressive Policy Institute, or PPI as it's called. It's a leading Democratic-leaning think tank, and he's the director of the American Identity Project at PPI. I also have to mention that he's the author of the celebrated biography of Albert Shanker, who was the leader of the New York City chapter of the American Federation of Teachers at the time that collective bargaining began in the United States. So I'm very pleased to have Richard Kahlenberg with me here on the Education Exchange to discuss his paper, The Distortion of American Studies, how the field's leading journal has embraced a worldview as slanted as Donald Trump's. Well, Richard, thank you for joining me on the Education Exchange.
Oh, wonderful to be here with you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Well, your title is your report's quite a mouthful, but your report's fascinating. You reviewed some 100 articles that were published in the last 2, 3 years in the American Quarterly, which is the flagship journal of the American Studies Association. So what did you find?
Well, we found that 80% of the articles were critical of America. So they were looking at issues like racism and imperialism and sexism and homophobia. 20% of the articles we coded as neutral. And believe me, we bent over backwards to find neutral ones. So these are articles which oftentimes were quite critical of America, but highlighted a member of a marginalized community who fought back. So at least there was some sense that there might be something positive about America because it does allow people to challenge racism and sexism and the like. And zero were positive. I mean, that's what was really stunning. I want the American Studies Association to run some critical articles about America because that's part of the story. But there was nothing positive, nothing about American ingenuity, nothing to explain why, with 4% of the population, we've got more than 40% of the Nobel Prize winners. No curiosity about why the United States is considered the number one destination among immigrants, the place that they want to come. So it's just a highly imbalanced portrait of America and really unrelentingly negative.
Well, you sound like Donald Trump. Now, you said you're not Donald Trump, so tell me how you're different from Donald Trump.
Well, it was important in the report's title, which, as you suggested, was a mouthful, to say that American Studies is distorting the picture as much as Donald Trump is, because he does the same thing in reverse. Notoriously, the National Park Service has been removing references to slavery. There was a recommendation as we celebrate our 250th anniversary that we commemorate certain people who've struggled against our real issues of racism in America. So Rosa Parks and Frederick Douglass. But these are Trump just wants to erase the negative and not acknowledge our shortcomings. And so we very much reject what he's doing. But we think that American Studies, which is supposed to be this very sophisticated academic group, the flagship journal that rejects the vast majority of articles, that would be, that they would have a higher standard than Trump, that they would provide a nuanced portrait of America. And that's not what we found.
Well, isn't this just a bunch of area intellectuals talking to one another? Does this have anything to do with American education or civics education in the United States? Aren't they? Can't we just ignore these folks who want to be critical of everything?
Yeah, it's a legitimate question because this is a rarefied journal. You know, if you do spend some time reading through the articles, they're impenetrable, and so it's read by a very small number of people. Having said that, it sets a tone, and graduate students who want to know how to be successful in academia follow this pattern, and it trickles down ultimately. I mean, people on the right and the left care about universities in part because they do set a tone that has an impact on the larger society. I mean, one piece of evidence is a recent poll which asked whether the American founders are more easily categorized or more appropriately categorized as heroes or villains. And among baby boomers, 1 in 10 said villains. Among Gen Z, among youth today, it's 4 in 10. I find that astonishing. Certainly, our founders were flawed. They were hypocrites. They held enslaved people even as they're championing liberty. But they unleashed ideas that changed the world, and that then abolitionists and civil rights leaders drew upon in order to change our society. And so the idea that they're villains is really remarkable. And so there does appear to be an impact from these high reaches of academia into the way that average young people think today.
Well, the 1619 project that the New York Times undertook is sort of brought a lot of this kind of thinking into a language that was then disseminated to high schools and colleges around the country. Do you think that what's the connection between the sort of American studies conversation and the 1619 project?
Yeah, I think the 1619 project is essentially a journalistic effort to translate the ethos of American Quarterly, the Journal of American Studies, into a broader public. And it's, the 1619 project, I've read the book, and there are some interesting things I learned. It's not all junk, but it has been roundly condemned by historians, including left of center historians, for flaws in its logic. Ultimately, it was an effort to justify a certain public policy, reparations for slavery. And the story of American slavery is so horrific that you don't need to exaggerate it. But the 1619 Project did. And it made all sorts of errors in its analysis. So there was an encouraging report that looked at the way that rank and file teachers talk about American history. And it wasn't as if the majority used the 1619 Project. I think it was 17%. But the fact that 17% would use a flawed analysis, to me, is troubling enough.
Well, so the American Studies is an academic journal, but how do they decide what to publish? Is this a peer reviewed? What's the process? And did you look into that at all?
So we know that we knew that it was kind of the most highly rated journal. There are, rankings of journals in terms of citations. And so we knew it was a competitive journal. It's the place that academics who are in this field want to publish. I think they publish about 5%, something like that, of the submissions. So it's quite elite. They have a triple blind effort, so the editors don't know those who submit, nor do the reviewers, and so it's they've set up a peer review process that's admirable in some ways. It's just what comes out at the other end is so distressing.
Well,
And
that actually worries me a little bit. If you told me, well, actually, they pick and choose what they want to publish. But if they have a very careful process and all of these articles are vetted by other scholars, then you say this is a window on our higher educational system as a whole, and not only the system as a whole, but the elite dominant institutions in that institution. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the fact that this is such a competitive process really underlines that people who are in this field value the work that is published in this journal.
Well, so there are a lot of new civics programs that are being developed at universities around the country. North Carolina has one, Texas has one, Florida has one or two. Cropping Ohio. Everywhere there's new something new developing. What do you think of these new civics programs in higher education?
Yeah, it's interesting because they are coded right. That is to say, oftentimes it's a conservative governor who says we need to have some independence here. I actually think it's a fabulous, as someone who's on the left of center, I think it's a fabulous development. I think it's a huge mistake for Democrats to be seen as not supporting institutions that study our founding documents. I mean, all the arguments that are used against Donald Trump and his violations of liberal democratic norms go back to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and so I find it deeply unfortunate that liberals are attacking these new centers. They do bring in ideological diversity, which actually I think is a positive thing, including for liberals. When I was a student at Harvard, I would spout my liberal ideas and everyone would nod their heads. And I wasn't tested. I thought the students on campus got a much better education because they were constantly having to defend their views and really think them through.
Well, Richard, you wrote a very good book on class in American society, so you're not opposed to being critical of the social structure of the United States. So, how does your own past work differ from the articles that you're criticizing?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I was talking to a Wall Street Journal reporter, and he said that the American Studies Association was saying I wanted boosterism about America, and I said, actually, much of my career has been spent criticizing American institutions. That the fact that public schools are so segregated, that our elite institutions of higher education allow very few low-income students in. I think the difference is that I've always applauded the fundamental aspirations of America, and it's precisely because social mobility is written into our DNA. The fact that that we have something called the American dream. Well, certainly, Canadians want social mobility and Australians want social mobility, but it's the American dream because it's so important to our society. And so I'm really calling, my work has tried to call America out when it didn't live up to its noble standards, as opposed to suggesting that the standards themselves are kind of a smokescreen for white racism and power, which is the kind of ideology you find in some places like American Quarterly.
Now, is the American Studies Quarterly typical of history and political science journals? I'll say that I just reviewed the American Political Science Review over a 5-year period when it was under the leadership of a group called the Feminist Collective. And I found that it had extraordinary biases, and that was also the conclusion of the Goldwater Institute, a right-wing think tank, but nonetheless gave chapter and verse on this. So just like your report does. So is this a general problem with journals now and in dealing with American political and historical topics?
So that's an empirical question to which I do not know the answer. But I think you've given me my next assignment to take on some of these other journals because it would be interesting to find out. I would go into it with an open mind, and maybe the American Historical Association's flagship journal is going to be more fair-minded than the American Studies Association. I just don't know, but it's worth investigating to see how extensive the problem is, and your analysis in political science suggests that this may be a much more widespread phenomenon that goes beyond American studies.
Well, so you wrote this great book on Albert Shanker. I just love that book. I've read it very carefully because I drew upon it for some work that I did. And it tells the story of Shanker's ability to rise from a son of a seamstress and somebody who was peddling newspapers, and he learns how to read, and he becomes a powerful intellectual force shaping American education. So, is that the kind of America you're talking about? Is that's not being presented?
Absolutely. In fact, Al Shanker is kind of the one of the key inspirations for the larger project I'm working on called the American Identity Project, because from his experience, he said that the key purpose of public education in America is to teach students what it means to be an American. And part of that is the social mobility that he experienced, but part of it was these founding ideals. I mean, Shanker would talk about the fact that we're this amazing experiment where people come from every corner of the world. What on earth is going to keep us together, bind us together? And it is certain American ideals. And Shanker was very opposed to the idea of identity politics where the schools teach students how they're different from one another, and instead wanted the commonality based on certain fundamental aspirations. And so that's what we're trying to pursue with a number of projects at the Progressive Policy Institute. We've got a great group of advisors. Of course, Al Shanker is no longer with us, but we have David Brooks and Bill Galston, former members of Congress, Bill Bradley and Doug Jones, and Richie Torres, who's in Congress now, Don Beyer, Danielle Allen, a number of terrific folks who are advising us on how to teach kids what it means to be an American today.
Well, so some people may get the idea that you're calling anything that's critical of the United States as some kind of an extremist essay. Could you give us some examples from the articles in the American Studies that sort of document exactly what you're talking about?
Well, and in the report we have in the appendix every single article from the past from a 3-year period, so people can judge for themselves. But to give you a few examples, one said that the thermodynamics, which is discussion of the relationship between energy and efforts to make energy more efficient, is an abstract settler capitalist theory that influenced the plunder of indigenous lands and lives. So that was one example. Another article looked at the National Football League, and basically said it was minstrels who were ensuring, let's see if I get the quote right, minstrel performers required to entertain white folk while ensuring that pre-existing racial hierarchies remained unscathed. These are articles that search for condemnation of America in places that most people wouldn't see something critical.
Well, okay, so I can't top that. So I'm going to just thank you for sharing this report with our listeners, Richard, and wish you well as you move forward with your American Identity Project at the Progressive Policy Institute.
Oh, wonderful to be with you, Paul. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I have been speaking with Richard Kahlenberg. He's the director of the program on American identity at the Progressive Policy Institute. He's the author of a new report entitled The Distortion of American Studies, How the Field's Leading Journal Has Embraced a Worldview as Slanted as Donald Trump's. I am Paul Peterson. This is the Education Exchange. Please join me for a new Education Exchange podcast released on the Education X website every Monday at noon Eastern Time.